Your Creative Push, episode 161.
Show up and create. And on the days when fear is kicking your butt, show up and create. And on the days when you feel on top of the world, show up and create.
Welcome to Your Creative Push, the podcast that pushes you to pursue your creative passions. I'm your host, Youngman Brown, and my guest today is Stephanie Halligan. Stephanie is a cartoonist and the art and soul behind art2self.com, where she delivers a daily dose of doodles and notes of inspiration to her subscribers' inboxes. And Stephanie, thank you so much for coming on the show. I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit about how you started Art2Self.
So I started Art2Self kind of out of a creative need that I had. I was craving something more creative in my life, and I was craving a place to share my experiences with the world and draw cartoons, but I wasn't quite sure what form that would take or how to do that. So I had been, when I first started Art2Self, I'd been blogging already for a couple years. I had a personal finance blog, actually, and so I'd been writing about, credit cards and 401ks, and I'd actually been adding cartoons little by little to that personal finance blog. And it was after I think about a year of doing that, I realized that I really wanted a space online that I could talk about my experiences that weren't just about personal finance, but also have a place that would hold me accountable to doing the things that I love, like drawing. And this idea and this craving came out of this blog that I was running that wasn't quite doing it for me, and wanting to commit to that daily habit of drawing cartoons every day. Because there'd been a point in my life where I had really lost that artistic drive. No part of me wanted to draw, and I'd lost that kind of childhood dream of mine for years and years and years. And so this idea of Art2Self was born, which was, what if I show up every day, draw a simple cartoon that had an inspirational message to it. I wrote a little note with it, and I sent it out to the world. So I set up the landing page, and, even before it started, I had 100 people sign up, and I was like, maybe I'm onto something. So I just started doing this every single day, and I sent out a cartoon and a note and kept drawing and kept writing, and people kept finding it and coming to it, and it became this wonderful, creative, self-reflective process for me that got me sitting down and drawing every day and doing what I love.
I love it. There's so many good elements to your story, and that's one of the reasons I really wanted you on, because, of course, I'm somebody who likes to try to motivate people too, and for me, writing about my life or writing kind of a humor type of thing, like you said with the, drawing about, finance, didn't quite do it for me either. And it's like you have to, I guess, keep plugging away, keep trying different things until you find the thing that completely aligns with you, where you're able to draw and also put yourself out there too. I love how it motivates you as much as it motivates all the people that subscribe to your email list.
Yeah, exactly. I think for me it was, what are the messages in cartoon form that I need to hear today? As an entrepreneur, as a creative person, as someone who's going through the ups and downs of life, what is the message I need the most right now? And I'm going to draw that. And if other people resonate with it, great. And when I can stay kind of true to that formula, then people find me and relate to me, because I'm just relating to myself and creating the work that I need the most in the world.
Exactly. And I think that's a really super important lesson for anybody doing anything creative, whether it's writing or drawing or music. It's putting your honest self out there, which is sometimes really tough to do, especially if you're not having the best day or you're scared to share your own struggles because you feel like it's putting too much of yourself out there and people won't relate. It's when you can put yourself out there like that, the most honest you can is when the people can relate, and really when your art is true, if that makes sense.
Exactly. Yep.
Now, you have this quote that, if you don't mind me reading, You said, every day I deal with that duality. One side of me believes that I can do anything versus the other side that's scared to do anything. It's the side that knows I'm amazing versus the side that doubts everything I do. And I think that completely resonates with me. And I think almost everybody listening can relate to that. So how do you deal with that duality then? How do you get past those bad days where you're doubting yourself in almost every step you do?
Yeah. Well, so there's no magic formula to it because it's like,
I wish there was.
I know, me too. So I'm also really happy that people relate to that because I wrote that line kind of in my about page in the intro to Art to Self. And I was like, this sounds slightly schizophrenic, but I hope other people understand. So that makes me happy. And I have a lot of people that write in and say that they relate to that phrase. But that duality, one is like we were just talking about showing up authentically in your work. My notes are these cartoon notes that I draw and I write a little blurb about them. They're not the Instagram yoga sunset that's like, believe in yourself and it will all work out. It's like I'm very intentional about writing like, this is what I'm struggling with right now and here's the reminder that I need, but it's not all sunshine and rainbows. And
there's meat to what you say too. It's not just like a little blur. It's like a very honest and open look, Right,
exactly. So I think that's important, which is being honest with myself and sharing that with the world and saying, I'm going to share something motivational, but I'm going to share the reality why I need that motivation right now. And I think the thing that's helped me the most is showing up, which is creating, I'm sure you can relate more than anyone, which is I've created something where I have to show up every day. Like I've created this brand and this, almost thing that I deliver to the world. And, I'll take vacations here and then, but most of the reason why I wanted to start Art to Self was that I had accountability, which is show up and create. And on the days when fear is kicking your butt, show up and create. On the days when you feel on top of the world, show up and create. And to just build that muscle, no matter what the emotional roller coaster looks like, that has been so important for me for building my skill set, for building my confidence, and just to keep that consistency going was basically to hold myself accountable to that consistency. I'm still a big believer in vacations and taking time off when you need it. But, if I let fear and emotional doubt and worry stop me from drawing, I probably would only draw like 10 days out of 365 every year. So it was important for me to be held accountable to that work.
It's so important. And one of the reasons why I created the podcast was because, like you said, it doesn't always come down to having a big audience because, well, that's something for me now that I have an audience. I'm like, oh man, I do have to show up today. I do have to put this out because people are actually looking for it. And I owe them, you know what I mean? But I struggled for years with when I would have those bad days, I would be like, all right, I'll do it tomorrow. And then that would turn into a bad week. That would turn into a bad month. And it's so easy to keep putting it off when you do have just one bad day where you don't feel like creating. It's just so easy to put it off and watch Netflix or do whatever. So I do think that is so important to make a self-imposed deadline, to make it a daily practice, even if it's only putting out a little bit of work, just doing it every day. And sometimes the best work comes out of those bad days too.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I've found, which is sometimes my lowest points have turned into the best cartoons where, I'll get like a slew of replies in my inbox the next day and they're like, oh my gosh, thank you for saying that. I thought I was the only one who thought this or felt this way or went through this. So yeah, it's amazing how sometimes those lowest moments can produce the best art.
For sure. And you mentioned that before that, people resonated with that quote that I read earlier, and that people write into you. Do you have any special stories about people that have written in that have, just really taken to what you've had to say?
Yeah. So, oh my gosh, I love this fan of mine. I have a 6-year-old mega fan.
Yeah.
And I know, she is my absolute favorite. Her name is Claire. I've met her mom before, but I'd never met Claire. But earlier this year, I came out with a children's book, and it had started as a blog post and it turned into like a Kindle book, and my readers were just like loving it and sharing it with their kids, just like reading it from their laptop. And I was like, oh my gosh, I need to turn this into like a real honest to goodness, like hold in your hand book. And it's called Happy to Be Me, a Tree.
Yeah.
And it's just like a very delightful story. And so apparently this mom had shared the Kindle version of this story with Claire, the 6-year-old, and she wouldn't give her dad's Kindle back to him. And she ended up writing me a letter in crayon, like a classic 6-year-old letter with like drawings of trees on it. She drew me on it. She drew her. And the letter is like sitting at my desk, and it's the gist of it, something like, Dear Steph, I love trees. Thank you for writing your book. Please write more books. I love you so much. Love, Claire. And I was like,
Aww.
This girl has never met me and has just absolutely like made my day and my year. So there was something really special about that letter too, which was like, you cannot pull the wool over the eyes of a 6-year-old. Like a 6-year-old's going to be really honest with what they think
No filter.
about. Yeah, exactly. No filter. So having that fan and that letter just reminds me that there's something pure in what I'm saying, and it's resonating with people. And I do also really love stories from people who are like, hey, I came across Art to Self, and the fact that you are doing this every day inspired me to do XYZ every day. And those are the stories where I'm like, awesome, you saw this, you saw what I was doing, and that, you know, helped you rediscover your craft and recommit to it too. And those are also some of my favorite letters. But it's that letter from 6-year-old Claire that sits on my desk that's like, okay, cool, I'm doing something right according to a 6-year-old, so I'm gonna keep on going.
Right. Yeah, and what you do is there's nothing selfish about it. There's nothing. It is pure, kind of like you said. Like a 6-year-old could resonate with it, and a 90-year-old could resonate it. And also, like, it's great for creative people and people that are listening to this, like, that need that kind of, you know, inspiration. So I highly suggest that everybody subscribes, because you don't have to listen to a 30-minute podcast. You can get it in like a minute or less. You know, just opening it, reading it, and enjoying it. But it not just creative people, just any human being that needs that kind of motivation, like that post-it note that says, you know, you're awesome, you can do this, you know, like, you're great, just keep doing what you're doing. And kind of like you're saying too, like, just you never know who you're going to resonate with. Like, just by being a person that does something every day and continues to put out content and is reliable like that, it can inspire somebody to become that type of a person too in whatever it is that they do.
Right, exactly. It's funny that I'm continuously amazed that, like, not just the notes themselves and the cartoons inspire people, but like the act of creating them inspires people. And I think that is really important for any sort of creative type or entrepreneur to remember, which is the act of you showing up and living your life can be just as like inspiring as whatever it is you create. And just showing someone that you're willing to put in like the hours and the effort can transform someone else's life. And it doesn't even matter what the work is that you do.
Absolutely. I couldn't have said it better myself. Now, on this show, we like to talk about resistance and like some of the things that can hold you back on a daily basis. And we've already touched on some of those. So I was wondering, is there anything else that, you know, on days where those bad days where you're like, oh man, I have to show up and I have to produce something. What are some of those things that kind of hold you back?
Yeah. So, I've been thinking a lot lately about creative confidence. Like, what does it mean to be confident in doing your work and showing up, and trying to articulate like what's happening to me on those days. And that has been really helpful because I've noticed patterns. I've noticed that like I have pretty much like 6 types of fear. They're pretty basic. They show up a lot and they don't really change their story that they're saying. So, you know, I can show up and right now I'm working on a new digital guide that I'm putting out on creative confidence. And I'm, you know, sitting down to write and I can like kind of feel that like doubt creep in. And when I start to feel that doubt creep in, I'm like, usually I think in the past I'd be like, oh no, I need to like replan this or I start second guessing it and I start, you know, wondering if I'm doing something wrong. But now I've been able to kind of identify that sensation and be like, oh, interesting. Like, you're showing up early today, self-doubt. Like, yeah, you clocked in early, and just recognize that it is always a part of the creative process that I have, after I've got like 450 cartoon notes now, and I've been doing this for like 2 years every day. So there's a part of me that some part of the creative process has gotten easier, like me drawing a cartoon and writing a note. I feel really confident in that piece. But as I continue to push my comfort zone, the fears come up again. So whenever they do come up, I look them in the eye and I'm like, oh, you're here. Okay, cool. That must mean that I'm doing something important. And I just remind myself that if it's coming up, I'm pushing an edge right now, and I have a choice. Either I'm not comfortable and I do need to kind of reframe what I'm thinking and what's going on, or I push through it and keep going. And I find some sort of accountability to push me and keep going. But I think even just the first step of recognizing that it's happening and knowing that it happens every single time has been really relaxing and comforting. It doesn't make like the self-doubt go away, but it just kind of diffuses it, if that makes sense.
Makes total sense. I think it is really important to kind of know your enemy.
Right.
and like you said, to know that it's going to show up. And again, one of the reasons of this podcast is to listen to everybody, all the guests talking about the same kind of fears. And when you know that everybody else goes through it too, it doesn't make it it's still tough, but it doesn't make it as tough.
Right.
So I think that's really important. So wait, so you're creating a new ebook about that?
Yeah. So, I've been running up against this creative fear and self-doubt and all of that stuff for the entirety of Art to Self. And I've been getting emails from readers, and it's, they're all very much along the same lines, which is, this is inspiring me to, take that first step, or I just need a push, or I need some accountability, or I need something's holding me back, believing that my work isn't good enough and perfectionism is getting in the way. And I can relate to those problems, and my readers can relate to my problems. So I thought it was about time to create something that just really synthesized what I do every day, which is, how do I push through these blocks and these fears? And even if they're present, how do I take action? And so it's actually been really fun to synthesize that and come up with a structure around it and be like, okay, well, how do you articulate this? How do you move past it? Like, what's an exercise in this moment that I can use to acknowledge the fear when it's present and take small steps anyway to diffuse it and to get some really meaningful creative work done. So I'm really excited to be putting this guide out there.
Very cool. And when can we expect to see that?
End of the month. And so that will be end of October.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah. So, and it's good for me to say that out loud, because that means it's holding me accountable and I'll get it done.
There you go. Absolutely. Okay, cool. So, for people listening right now, what is the best way that they could get their hands on it?
Yeah.
Just to subscribe at arttoself.com?
You can subscribe at arttoself.com. I'll be sending out an announcement. And then at the end of the month, you can go to arttoself.com/creative confidence, and the guide will be up there.
Okay, cool. And we'll link that in the show notes, and we'll also push it out at the end of the month when it comes out.
Great.
Cool. So kind of talking about the idea of time, like the daily thing where, resistance creeps up right in the beginning of your day and you're like, oh man, I have a full day. How do you balance your time then, especially dealing with those kinds of blocks that you have to also battle?
Yeah. So for me, and I'm sure you've probably talked about this book on this podcast before, but The War of Art was one of those books that I read, and it got me thinking about the importance of doing something daily, and that snowballed into creating Art to Self. But for me, Art to Self is still not my full-time business. I run a totally separate consulting business around personal finance and like financial literacy, like a completely different world where I have clients and emails and the demands of, normal work life. And so for me, and I'm sure everyone else feels this way, like when my resistance is least strong first thing in the morning, when I have motivation, when I haven't checked social media 1,000 times already, or I've gotten lost in my inbox, So if I can commit to working on my own craft before anything else, whether or not it's an hour or 2 hours, if I have that much time, or even just 15 minutes, it just creates a precedent for me that I put myself first and I put my work first before I put answering to other people first. So I think creating that priority has been really, really helpful. And then the other thing, it sounds so simple. I took off email from my phone and all of my social media apps, and that has been a wonderful way to not get lost and build up procrastination when I want to get work done in the morning. And it was so simple to do, but it's really changed the way that I start my day and gives me a lot of momentum to create the things that I want to do.
So important. Well, two really important things there. I do a similar thing. I don't turn my email off of my phone, but I save email for the weekend. I have to. But I always check to see incoming messages, especially when I have interviews throughout the week, just to see if there's anything kind of pertinent. But I just push everything off until the weekend and try to take it out of my mind too. I'm just like, all right, this is like a thing that I do on first thing on Friday. I catch up on my email and then don't worry about it all week long. So I think that's really important too. Whatever like your main distraction is that you find yourself checking all the day or all day long, like Facebook, Twitter, whatever it happens to be, maybe take it off your phone. Maybe you only need to check that in the morning and at night or something like that. You know what I mean? And just kind of batch it in that way. So that you're not wasting all these like micro seconds all day and minutes and hours all day long.
Right. Exactly.
But also the idea of getting stuff done in the morning. I've never really been late to doing anything that was due. So if I actually even put personal things in front of that, even though that thing might be due tomorrow, I just feel so much better about my day if I can get something done for myself first and then save that thing for later, because I know I'm going to get it done, even if I have to sacrifice some sleep. But I don't know. I think it is important to do something for yourself so you kind of have the day for yourself where you're just feeling better about yourself, whether it's working out, whether it's creating something, whatever it is. Just like you said, devote those beginning hours to yourself when the resistance is not as strong.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the other piece of that's important is understanding where you seek accountability and how you get accountability in this world. And I read this, there's a new book out by Gretchen Rubin. I think it's called Better Than Before. I'll have to check on that title. But it talks about the 4 different personality types of accountability, essentially. And I know for me, I am an upholder type, which means if I say it to other people and I say it to myself, I will do it 100%. But there are other people who, are questioners who don't like to be held accountable to anyone else. But if they commit to themselves internally, they will, go off and run with it. And there's other people who really need support and they really need other people to hold them accountable, like almost like a gym trainer. So kind of knowing what it is that you need to hold yourself accountable and then creating either a real framework around it, like a daily art newsletter, a daily podcast, or creating someone to check in with you to make sure that you're doing it. I think it's really important to just build that framework around yourself, whatever you need to hold yourself accountable to.
Or a bet with a friend.
Right, exactly.
give them $500 and be like, yeah, if I don't, ship it every single day for this year, don't give this back.
Right, yes. Like money is a very universal accountability tool.
Absolutely. And bragging rights.
Right.
So cool. So before we let you go, I was wondering if you had a favorite book or YouTube clip or anything else that you draw inspiration from. You already mentioned the Gretchen Rubin book, but I don't know if you had anything else that kind of helps to motivate you on a daily basis.
So I think there's 2 books that I would recommend to any creative type. One I just read this past year, which is the Jim Henson biography. Reading that book, one, it reignited my love for Muppets and puppets, which I forgot that I loved growing up. But reading about the artistic integrity that Jim Henson had throughout his entire life in creating the Muppets and working for Sesame Street, and then finding ways to make money around it, and also how long it took for him to be successful. I think it was 20 or 30 years before it became what we know it to be. So that book was incredibly inspirational. And then for anyone who's an, cartoonist or illustrator out there, I just always love reading the work of the people that I admire. So I'm a big Calvin and Hobbes fan. And if you go to arttoself.com, you'll kind of notice like my style is a little Calvin and Hobbesy. And I also really love the Chuck Jones biography, which is, he's one of the more famous animators behind Bugs Bunny and Looney Tunes. So I think any time that you could just pick up a book and look at other people's work that you loved in childhood or that inspires you in whatever your craft is, that is always a big motivator for me.
The Jim Henson one is important too. I think it can't be understated, like how long it did take him to do that, and also like how kind of unique of a art style that is. And despite the fact that it didn't really exist, despite the fact that, nobody else was really doing it, he still just did it because he loved it. So important. That
perseverance just was so inspiring, and the commitment to what he loved and what he knew worked too. It's just a fabulous story.
I remember I cried the day he died.
Oh yeah. And rereading the end of that book. And just his funeral and the people and lives that he changed was really emotional.
Oh man. Well, all right, let's end this on a happy note then with the final push. And this is where I ask you to reach through the microphone and grab the shoulder of one of the listeners that you've already really inspired today, and just give them your best words of advice and really just push them to pursue their creative passions.
So, I would say to anyone out there, and if I could rewind the clock and go back to my old self, the part of me that wasn't drawing cartoons, like way before Art to Self, that I kind of lost that childhood dream of mine, I would say it's okay if you've stopped. It's okay if you're not doing the thing that's been bubbling up in you for so long that you should be doing or you really want to do. It's okay that you're not there. But how about tomorrow? How about tomorrow you take one small step and you find one moment of your day where you can try and stumble and experiment and maybe unlock something that you love again, because all it takes is just a little bit of time and I think, self-compassion to realize that you have to start somewhere, and letting yourself start at the very beginning. That's what it means, I think, to live a creative life, and you owe it to yourself and to your craft to at least try a little bit and see where it takes you.
Yeah, couldn't have said it better myself. It's so true. And you're not the first person to mention, losing your creative drive and having a large gap. And I think it is really important to have that self-compassion that you mentioned, because everybody kind of goes through those lulls, whether it's a week, a month, a year, a decade, it happens. And to brush that off as like, oh, well, look at all this time I wasted. Why even start? No. You know what I mean? No. Why not start today, tomorrow? Get going right away.
Yeah, exactly.
Stephanie, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really, as I mentioned before, you were one of the reasons that I actually started this podcast, because I heard you on another podcast that I wished there was more artists on. So it's, I don't know, 160 something episodes now, and I am so happy to have you on the show. So it's really a special moment for me. So thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me and sharing that story too. That really means a lot. So it's really great to be here.
Of course. And you can find Stephanie on her website, arttoself.com. You should go there, type in your email address, and you will get daily inspiration. On Facebook, Steph is Art to Self. On Twitter, Steph Halligan, STEPH, HALLIGAN. And on Instagram, she is Stephanie Halligan. Stephanie, thank you again.
Thank you.
Oh, huge thank you to Stephanie. And we talked about it before the episode, she and I, about how she was one of the first people that I reached out to, because she was a guest on Entrepreneur on Fire with John Lee Dumas, who is, kind of my sensei as far as, learning about podcasting. He's one of the inspirations for me to create the podcast. So when she was on his show, which is a daily podcast where he interviews entrepreneurs, I find it really inspiring. However, I don't really do anything kind of entrepreneurial. At least I don't make a cent except for my Patreon supporters from this podcast. And by the way, you can head to yourcreativepush.com/Patreon if you want to help support the podcast. I would really appreciate that. But when Stephanie was on the show, I was like, damn, I wish there was more artists on this show. I wish there was a daily podcast for artists. So that was one of the instigating events that kind of led me to create this podcast. So it was really an honor to interview her today. And one of the really important things that she mentioned is that daily grind. It's keep showing up and putting in the work, whether it's a good day, like she said, or a bad day, because those bad days can start piling up. And if you don't have that habit of showing up every day and creating, it's very easy to get a very long break in your creativity that could last a year or two, like it did for me. And a great resource for dealing with this, another thing that helped to not inspire the podcast, but to shape where I wanted it to go, was that book by Steven Pressfield, The War of Art. It's a short read. I highly recommend you go check it out. You can head to yourcreativepush.com/161. If you want a link to buy that, if you buy it through my link, it's another way you can actually support the show. Any links, any resources that we have on the show, if you go to the show notes page and click through that link, I will get a very small commission, but it helps nonetheless. But something that book talked about, and something that Stephanie really drove home today, was the idea of recognizing doubt and all the other kinds of voices that are in your head that want to hold you back. And realizing that they're always going to be there. They're always going to be a part of your life, especially your creative process. And no matter what heights you propel yourself in your creative career to, they'll always be there in one form or another. So it's like when you meditate and you're supposed to clear your head of thoughts, so that when a thought comes in your head, you kind of just observe it without judgment, which is something that I just can't do, which is why I suck at meditating. But anyway, you're supposed to just observe that thought and not give it any judgment as it kind of just floats away, and you just observe it floating away. Try to do that with these voices that pop into your head during the creative process, just like Stephanie does. Be like, oh, hello there, doubt. You're showing up awfully early today. It's going to show up, so just let it sit there and let it be bored while you go and do your thing, not paying it any more attention than the fact that it's there. And if that's really tough for you to do and you need some help drowning those voices out, feel free to go back and play some back episodes of Your Creative Push. That should always help. But that's all I've got for you today. Hopefully you were inspired to go and get your work done. So go and get it done, and we will be here for you next week if you need the push again. Have a wonderful, productive weekend, and we will see you then. Bye. Never miss a push. Head to yourcreativepush.com/subscribe to find the easiest way for you to subscribe to the podcast.